I'll introduce each of the speakers as we go along, and the way that this will work is each one will sort of present their own mini presentation, and then we'll bring it back for a group Q&A session. So we have Dan Moseke from University of Arizona, Meg Sparling from the University of California, Davis, and Emily Brashear from Washington State University. The way that this panel is going to work, as I said, is each panelist will kind of share their screen and give kind of a mini presentation around how they're using Pivot. This will roughly be anywhere 6 to 10 minutes for each of our speakers. And then, as I said, we'll come back and do a panel Q&A with all of our panelists together. As Ella said, please do take advantage of the chat or Q&A features within the WebEx console. We will gather those and moderate those and pass those on to our speakers when it's time for Q&A. So you don't have to wait till the end. Go ahead and, if you have questions along the way, you won't be able to unmute yourself, but please do go ahead and, submit those questions so we have them ready to go. And before I hand it over to our first speaker, just again, how we sort of set this up was we did ask for all of you users, PivotRP customers, to provide us some questions in advance and some of the things that you would like to hear from our speakers. The questions sort of all fell into two different kind of categories, of which I've grouped together here, just so you can see. Each of our speakers' presentations isn't necessarily going to tick off each of these questions, and certainly not in order, but thematically they will cover these two general areas, which is one, what is the speaker's role and what is, their role within their research department, and what are some of the challenges that they're facing that PivotRP helps with, and how does PivotRP sort of help them scale to do their job. So there's sort of those roles and challenges category. And then the rest of the questions were around more engagement and communication. What are some of the strategies and tools that you're using to communicate about funding opportunities with your faculty and users? In general, sort of how do you promote or market PivotRP, and what other sort of tips or general challenges are you facing? So each of our speakers will sort of cover those in general, and then we'll come back for a deeper Q&A if you have specific questions. With that, I will just kind of go off camera and, oops, no, I won't. I'll stay on camera for now. And I want to introduce our first speaker, who is, as I said, Dan Moseke, who is the Senior Program Manager for Research Development Services at the University of Arizona. Dan is responsible for managing the limited submissions process, for creating and disseminating funding newsletters. He is a Fulbright liaison and also assists the research development team with proposal support. Dan has an MS in Global Technology and Development, and many years of experience across multiple departments, both at the University of Arizona and the University of Virginia. Dan is an alum of the University of Arizona, so I don't want to date him, but he's been there for a very long time, and he's an active volunteer in the community, and in particular, the bicycling community. With that, I'd like to welcome Dan Moseke, and we'll turn over controls to you.
All righty. Let me just share this. Thank you, Eddie and Ella, and my fellow panelists for having me this morning. I appreciate the chance to discuss what we're doing at the University of Arizona. Let me get my presentation uploaded here. Just waiting for the blue bar to go all the way across. There we go. Hopefully you can all see that now. My contact information, yeah, sure. Excellent. Okay, my contact information is there on the first slide, and these slides and presentations being recorded. So I would begin by saying if you have any questions about what I'm going to talk about, or how we're using Pivot, or other questions about limited submissions at University of Arizona, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to speak to anyone. About the University of Arizona, we are a Research One institution in Tucson, Arizona. We're a land-grant university, and we were actually founded before Arizona was a state. We're a top 20 public research university with $734 million in research expenditures. We're sixth in NASA funding. We have 2 different medical school campuses, one here in Tucson and one up in Phoenix, as well as a cancer center. We're ranked 3rd as a producer of Fulbright scholars, and we have a new College of Vet Medicine, as well as Biosphere 2, you may have seen before, and our True Reading Lab, and our water research program. I list all of those things to note the huge diversity of research interests and faculty out on our campus, and that is something that's both a challenge and opportunity within Pivot, is identifying funding for all of these different research capabilities that our university has. This is me again. That's me when people wore ties and got haircuts, I guess. I work in Research Development Services, which is a centrally located research development office. We partner with all of the different research administrative offices at all of the different colleges, but we are a centrally located office with a staff of colleagues who are experts in their discipline. And we are the centrally located contact point for Pivot. Myself, I manage limited submissions. So if there's anyone on this call who is managing limited submissions, I'd be happy to talk to you more about that. We do have a limited submissions community of practice that is open to everyone across the country. So feel free to email me about that. I'm also a Fulbright liaison, and I handle our funding announcements and newsletters, 2 of those that go out per week, and also collaborate with colleagues on our internal funding programs. And then I'm the Pivot contact, and as well as InfoReady Review. How do we use Pivot at U of A? So one of the main functions I use it for is to identify limited submissions. It's a really great way to do that without having to read solicitation after solicitation. The Pivot staff does an excellent job of identifying limits and what those limits are. We also use it heavily to push listings to InfoReady. So when I need to run an internal competition, it's a really seamless integration, and it's a real time saver. We use the curated lists functions and curated searches that we embed within our newsletters, and I'll show you that in just a second. I've just recently become a Fulbright liaison, and I've been using Pivot to help interested faculty look for Fulbright partners internationally, as well as in the United States. And then I do one-on-one meetings with faculty to set up their profiles and set up saved searches. And graduate students do use it to locate publication and conference opportunities, although not so much right now. Here's an example of how we embed curated searches and lists within our newsletters. These are repeated week after week, and so people can, it's a sort of shortcut, if you will, into using Pivot. People can just click on that opportunity straight out of our newsletter, which I distribute in MailChimp, and it just connects right to that search. I also use it as a quick opportunity to introduce Pivot to people. A university of our size, we have a lot of new faculty. We're constantly hiring new faculty, or people are moving on in their careers. So it's an opportunity to educate people about Pivot within the newsletter. Here's a couple of websites that we embed Pivot into, or that we give people examples of how to further use Pivot. And some Pivot tips, I guess, from our experience at university. The image at the top is what our site looks like. So that's the custom branding feature, and I really recommend using that. It's especially valuable on the emails that come automatically from the system. It'll come branded with the university logo, and that just, it gives it that sort of air of official searching, official notices that it's you know, something that's been vetted by the Research Development Office. As I already said, the integration with InfoReady is a huge time saver. So I definitely, if you have subscription to both of those or are thinking about it, I highly recommend that. I also recommend that you partner with all the different research administrators on campus, but limit in the admin menu who can use different features, so there's a consistent message. For example, I'm the only one who can change the custom branding feature. I don't want a brand new administrator at one of our colleges to change the logo to their logo, for example. And then I also recommend checking back often. Pivot is always adding new features, and Eddie and his team are really great about announcing those to the Pivot community. Our Pivot plans, I really want to do better website integration. We had that on the list to do last year, and then with COVID, our comms team got pulled off and had to do a variety of other work. So we're really planning to do some more website integration this year. I'd also like to do more targeted Pivot newsletters. That's a feature that I'm not really using right now, and I'd like to do that more. We're also planning to do a full training session of Pivot at our new faculty orientation in the fall semester. We find if we catch faculty early, they are much more likely to stay committed to updating their profile and using the system. And then the feature that's been added recently, the awarded grants, I think I'm keeping my eye on that as a really potentially useful way to strategically plan funding for faculty as they advance in their career. So those are some future plans for Pivot. And that concludes my slides. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to hearing from my fellow panelists and answering your questions. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Dan. I know I said I'd hold questions till the end, which I will, but I just wanted to let you know somebody in the chat or questions had asked if you could share the limited submission opportunity community information that you have. So just giving you a heads up if that's something you can share in the chat, or we could share it out later.
So the way that works is that it's a Google group that's by invitation. So I just need whoever, if you're interested in that community group, just send me an email and I can send you the invitation, or one of my fellow administrators of that Google group can send the link.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to introduce our next panelist. Happy to have Dr. Meg Sparling, who's the Funding Opportunities Coordinator from the University of California, Davis, joining us. Meg is not only the Research Funding Coordinator, but she is the Limited Submission Coordinator for UC Davis, and she's part of a centralized research development team within the Office of Research at the University of California, Davis. And with that, I'd like to invite Meg to present.
All right, let me get my slides pulled up here. All right, can you see my first slide?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
Great. So thank you, Eddie, and thank you, Ella. I'm going to try not to repeat too much of what Dan was talking about, but I will briefly mention that I am part of that Google limited submissions community, and it is extremely helpful. So if there are people online who do limited submissions and are not part of that group, I highly recommend it. So my presentation is maximizing Pivot RP usage to enable our research community. There's my email address on the slide there. If you want to follow up with me later, I'm happy to answer questions. So here we go. So UC Davis is also a tier 1 research university like the University of Arizona, with several thousand faculty and researchers working in a very broad variety of disciplines also. We are very proud of the fact that we set an institutional record for external research funding last year, approaching 1 billion. So we're very, very excited about that. And like most tier 1 or R1 institutions, the federal government is the top funder for our research, making up half the total awards. And this is primarily from NIH, NSF, and USDA. We're also very proud of the fact that we are #1 in the nation and #2 in the world in both agricultural research and veterinary medicine. And to give you a sense of our breadth, we also have a school of medicine and a research vineyard and a nuclear reactor, which I have been to. It is so cool. So we're a very exciting university. And there's a lot of research going on that's really exciting and it needs to be supported. So I have the Herculean and fun task of being basically the only research funding coordinator at the university, the only person who's like solely responsible for helping people find funding opportunities to apply to. I also coordinate the limited submissions process for the campus. So I have basically 2 full-time jobs that I do. It's a lot of work. And I am in the process of trying to get some help. But with the pandemic last year, I was actually handed a new responsibility of creating and coordinating a COVID-19 research community with a fellow staff member. And so all of this kind of came together to force me to really rely more heavily on the tools that I have access to, and in particular, Pivot. So I'm going to just talk briefly about that. As I say here on the slide, I am in great need of tools that help me wade through the hundreds of RFPs that are released each week, and then transition from reviewing them to sharing them either widely or specifically or both. And then, of course, turning some of them into campus competitions if they're limited submissions. And luckily, I do have the Pivot and InfoReady integration. So I'm like Dan, it's easier for me to just take limited submissions from Pivot and push them into InfoReady and create competition pages for them. So more context, this as I see it, basically the context of my job and the context of the people that I support. So my sense is that researchers' email inboxes are completely out of control. Email is actually, in some ways, not the perfect way to reach them. Their time is greatly impacted. They need to see relevant opportunities sometimes in a very timely way. Especially federal agencies lately have been just getting very condensed or truncated with their timelines. And so sometimes it's a matter of a week or two that you really need to reach out and connect a researcher with an opportunity or it's too late. And also finding ways to grab their attention so that they actually understand immediately how it's relevant to them. So the support staff that we have, and really I'm just talking about me at this point, I need to cut straight to the relevant opportunities and make those opportunities easy to share, not only with researchers, but with their teams to a certain extent, or some of the researchers. So the researchers themselves also want tools that they can use to share among their teams and their labs, their students, which Pivot has become better, much better recently in enabling researchers to do that, and I'll talk about that a little bit. And then also, research institutes and units on campus are very interested now in being able to display relevant funding opportunities on their own websites. And so I'm now able to help them do that really easily. So I'm just going to talk about 3 of my more recent strategies, like 3 of the ways that I have recently decided to start increasing or improving my pivot usage and making my time more efficient and helping the researchers take a little bit more of an active role in the use of Pivot and not just relying on me to share things with them all the time. So my first strategy is the curated searches and curated lists, like Dan was talking about. I am now in the process of creating a search or a list, depending on the circumstance, for each campus research initiative or trending research topic, and I make them public so that all the users can see them. I also paste links to these searches and lists into my own weekly research funding updates newsletters that I send out across the campus, so that if the newsletter that someone's looking at doesn't have funding opportunities that seem very relevant to them, they have the ability to click through and see opportunities that are more relevant. And then, of course, as I'll talk about in 2 bullet points, curated searches and lists are easy for research units and other units to be able to turn them into embedded searches on their own websites. So, second strategy, I have been really trying to promote and push teams, labs, certain research groups to use the groups feature in Pivot. They often come to me wanting the ability to share Pivot searches amongst themselves, and that's my in. Usually I help them set up a group in Pivot, and then they create a saved search that they can share amongst themselves, which they really appreciate and use, I've found. And this also has the added benefit of kind of getting them going and having them working on their own so that I don't have to provide them with as much support as I used to in the past, which is great with how impacted my time is. And then finally, the third strategy I've been really focusing on lately is the embedded searches. And I think of this as meeting the researchers where they are. So helping the staff and leadership of research institutes and centers on campus to create first a search or a list and then an embedded widget for their website that provides their affiliates with a relevant and useful list of opportunities each week. So I believe that's my last slide. Oh, no, one more slide. So, I am kind of just starting this process of trying to really move in to Pivot more. We've had Pivot for a long time, but I've been using it mostly to create my own newsletters. And then if people come to me and ask me how do I find funding opportunities, I'll say, look in Pivot. But I'm trying to use the actual technical tools more now. And so my plans for the future are basically multiplying and fine-tuning the newsletters that we generate in Pivot, so that ideally at some point every faculty member can receive a Pivot generated list of opportunities each week targeted to their specific research. That would be amazing, and I would like to work towards that. I'd like to have curated searches for campus big ideas, NSF big ideas, major campus research initiatives or institutes, etc. And I need to pursue the CAIU's integration because that will really help us. We already use CAIU's, but we don't have the integration. And I would like to find ways of finding 100% faculty usage of Pivot RP. That would make my job extremely easier. So I'm happy to talk about kind of some of the plans and strategies that I have for pursuing that lofty goal. And that is me.
All right, thank you so much, Meg. Great information. And I want to also see 100% faculty usage at UC Davis as well. So happy to strategize with you on that. Our next presenter is Emily Brashear. She's the Faculty Research Development Specialist in the Office of Research Advancement and Partnerships at Washington State University. Emily is the sole person in charge of the limited submission process. She's the liaison for Pivot RP and provides training on how to find funding opportunities through the Pivot RP database. And lastly, she's responsible for distributing the funding newsletter throughout the university. And I also have to give Emily thanks for really pushing me to get this user group together. And so some credit for that goes to Emily. So I'll pass over the presentation for you, Emily.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. I really did push this a lot on Eddie a while ago because I was the only one that, and oh, sorry, wrong button. I was the only one in my department that was doing this, and I didn't come from a research development background. I actually have a bachelor's in criminal justice, and I came from the police department. So when I was thrown into this job, or when I took onto this job, I had no one to bounce ideas off of. And so I was grasping at everything because my boss was asking me a lot. And so I'm really glad that I have this chance to share and learn from everybody else what they're doing out in each individual university or even colleges within those universities. So I am in the Office of Research Advancement and Partnerships that is under the Office of Research umbrella. At WSU, we just help with proposal development, the beginning stages of finding the funding for the faculty, or creating the collaborations to help develop the proposal. So that's and then we pass that off as soon as we submit it to the agency. We pass that off to another department. So at WSU, or I should say in the state of Washington, we are actually in every county. There is a presence of Washington State University. We do have 5 different campuses. Pullman right now is the main campus. The cool thing about this presentation so far is we are not number 1. We don't have $700 million in funding. We have 345. However, that's really exciting to us. So no matter where you're at your institution, if you think, well, and a lot of times you hear the kickback of, well, they have a lot of money to be able to spend on different resources. And so far we've been able to hear from Dan and Meg that we're kind of all in the same boat still. And that's kind of cool for me, knowing that our university isn't bringing in as much money, but they're all having the same struggles. We obviously don't have as much faculty as the others, but with that, we do have, it's just me. And like Meg, I'm responsible for all the funding for the Pivot, for limited submissions. And WSU, although we don't bring in as much funding as everyone else so far, but we're very big in agriculture. And I shouldn't say just WSU. Washington State is well known for agriculture. Obviously, we produce 64% of the nation's apples. We're weirdly known for potatoes farming, and we have high wheat. So, and random fact of on the Pullman area, which is close to the Idaho border, is we have the National Lentil Festival. So if you're ever interested in legumes, this is the place to be. But also on the west side of the state, Washington is large into tech companies. In the Seattle area, there's Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Expedia, things like that. So there is that vast difference, just like everyone else. So we're tasked with doing more with just me. So I'm supposed to help the researchers, but this also includes postdocs and grad students. We want them to find funding. We want to keep track of the reoccurring opportunities so that we can keep on top of it, staying up to date with the new ones, obviously. I do manage the limited submission process, so even though that whole county page, everyone still has to come through me, or every county office comes through me, and they want us to just keep plugging out announcements. But then you guys might get this too, where you're like, oh, can you notify the faculty of the funding opportunities, but don't email too much, and then this person only wants this, and so you have to, there's not enough for me to be able to say, okay, I have this list of faculty who I'm not supposed to email, but only email when it pertains to them, and I'm supposed to remember their research. So how do we maximize Pivot to help our researchers? Well, I am a very newly proponent of the Pivot newsletter. I used to do this old newsletter, and this was kind of like newish to us even. It was clunky. I had to cut and paste a lot. My links, I mean, I'm human, but sometimes I'm like, I swear that link worked before I sent it. We would pick maybe like 5 or 6 funding opportunities to hit. It was a hassle and I hated it. And I know Eddie and everybody else was like, just use the Pivot newsletter. It's really easy. And then once they did the branding, it was like everybody paid attention to it more. So out with the old, in with the new. And I still do it a little bit cumbersome, but it is 100 times better. So they get this newsletter. I go in, I go through, you know, I have certain categories that I will just randomly select. So they're not the same each time. I've created little, you can see like arts and humanities, community grants. I just create these general topic areas. I throw a couple in there. You can see that they get what they need. Like Meg said, faculty need something really simple just to look at real fast, not a lot of wording, and read it. So I should back up. So at the beginning of the newsletter, which is this kind of covered, but you can put a little bit of information of maybe snippets of what's happening in your department, and then the newsletters below. So that's also another plug of where if they look at the newsletter, they're also going to see, well, we have information sessions or brown bag sessions of how to learn how to do something else. So that's a little bit of a plug that we use in that one. Then I just create this so they have an easy access. If they want to view the full list of my arts and humanities, they can click on it. It takes them right there. So the cumbersome part that I've done is you can put in whatever topics you want, but then have it reoccur every time. So if you always want to highlight health, if you always want to highlight engineering opportunities, you can make that standard. We just kind of change it up. So I create a new newsletter when we only do this every other week, or when I have time, I guess once a month sometimes. So that way it's not always the same. They're not going to say, well, I'm not an engineer, I'm just not going to look at it anymore. So that's the hope of that. So if you aren't using the Pivot newsletters, feel free to reach out. I would help out in any way that you need to. So that is my one plug for that. The other thing we do link our searches. So on our website, we created these quick links that if you're just interested to see what funding opportunities are out there in these, you know, quick topic guides, I guess, it'll take you straight into the funding and you can see what came up from that. honestly, I don't know how many people are using this because they have to go into our specific website. But we have them there just in case, because new faculty they might search in our Grand Bar funding and it'll take them there and then they can read about it. The last thing that I want to highlight is the embedded searches, just like Meg. And I can't remember if Dan highlighted this or not, but on our websites for our reoccurring federal pages, it's just always there. So if they do land on this page, they can see the funding opportunities that are out there. I have started reaching out to individual colleges because honestly, faculty are more apt to go to their college website than the Office of Research sometimes, or even the Office of Research Advancement and Partnerships. Like, that's really stretching. They got to know who we are. However, I am linking up with their colleges to see how we can get these embedded searches onto their website. So that's really exciting for us. The more exposure to Pivot, the better it is for me. By promoting Pivot, we do a lot of one-on-one or group settings as far as teaching and training. And so it's easier for me if we just get this out there more. So again, it's kind of one of those, you don't want to send a bunch of emails, but you got to send something to get it going. So hopefully through the Pivot newsletter, the quick searches and these embedded searches, we can have more exposure. And that's it. Thanks. Contact me if you guys need any help with anything. And I'm so glad that there's a community out there. I'm not alone.
All right, thank you so much, Emily. And really great point about, no matter what size institution you are, and we know this from, working with many different customers of all different sizes, no matter what size you are, it seems like the challenges are the same. So I'm glad that we're all talking about it today. With that, let's move on to our Q&A. I'll invite, if they're comfortable, our three speakers to each unmute themselves and feel free to come back on camera. I can stop sharing the slide so we can see you instead of the slide if that works. But let's get to our Q&A. If you haven't submitted a question yet, use the Q&A or chat feature in the WebEx console. We'll try to get through as many of those as we can in the next 10 to 15 minutes or so. So let me see if I can navigate to that as well. Let's see. Well, actually, Ella, maybe you can let me know if I should keep sharing the slide or not share the slide. But I did see a question had come in, so I'll just this was kind of a softball question to get us going. And Meg, you touched on it a little bit, was really, how has COVID changed the way you work, or has it caused any further challenges for you in your role specifically? Meg, I don't know if you wanted to add on anything to what you had already talked about before, and whether Emily or Dan, you want to chime in on the impacts of COVID on your role, and maybe specifically whether Pivot has helped or how it may have helped or changed the way you use it.
Yeah, I'll just reiterate that I went from feeling like I had 2 full-time jobs to 3 full-time jobs last March when this started. Luckily, I did have someone to share the load with me a little bit, but last year was a nightmare in trying to balance everything, and Pivot was one of my things that just I fell back on and really helped me out. And so yeah, I'm happy to talk more about that, but I'll also open it up to the other panelists.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I can jump in. In a way, and this might sound a little weird, but COVID was a blessing because now people had time to sit around and look for funding. And so I did a lot of, I felt like that was my main job for a while, is just training people how to use Pivot, because I didn't it was worth my time to show them so that they could go and explore. And then if they couldn't find anything they were looking for, to come back and I would help them, narrow something down. But I actually, it was an additional responsibility on top of that, but showing people how to use Pivot to find the funding was really, kind of a key to helping me get, Pivot out there, I guess.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add there. I would, echo the fact that it was very challenging. I would also say, our entire office went to working remote. So having Pivot as an all online function was, that was fairly seamless to transitioning to working remote. We were also, our university had a furlough program, so the number of hours that I had available to do things was curtailed. And we had some student employees that had been working with us who graduated. So a lot of last year was spent just trying to keep our heads above water and planning for this year, I guess. So that's what I'm really looking forward to. Actually, I wrote several notes from Meg and Emily's presentation reminding me, oh yes, we want to do that as well with Pivot, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that in the coming months.
Okay. Thank you. And let me try to, again, I said I'll try to get through as many of the questions that have come through as possible. It's a little hard to see some of them. So one question was, our university is in the process of identifying some targeted topic areas, and they'd like to identify funding in these general areas to make the information more useful for faculty. And the question is, what do you think is the best way to do this using Pivot? Is it through the curated lists or searches or groups? And if it's a curated list, is each one owned by one person, or can multiple administrators add to the list? Before I hand that off to any one of you that would like to jump in, I can answer the last part of it. Currently, curated lists and searches can only be administered by one person. Sometimes if you have multiple people in your research development office or something, we can set up kind of a generic account that you could share amongst yourselves if you need more than one person to manage it. But that workaround will sort of be a moot point, as we're working toward later in this year to be able to allow administrators to have multiple administrators of a list. But back to the first part of that question, just for any of our panelists, what do you feel is the best way? Is it using curated lists or searches or groups to target specific areas, or a combination of all of the above, I guess?
Yeah, my experience is that it kind of depends. Lists and groups, curated lists and curated searches, sorry, are different in that, a list is something that's a little bit more static, that you pull particular research funding opportunities together and put them on a list. And so if you basically just want to share a list of opportunities with people and have that list be relatively static unless you go in and change it, then that's the situation to use the list. If you're creating a search that adapts over time, then, or if you're in a situation where you need something that adapts over time, then the curated search is the way to go. And I have found when I have been creating a lot of these for, trending research topics on campus, and creating things for specific research institutes, that I am usually creating a curated search for them. Plus, the curated search has the benefit of you not having to go in and manipulate it at the time. You can kind of get it set the way you want it and just let it go. If you create a list, you always kind of have to have on your agenda, like, oh, I have to go back and revisit all of my lists and make sure that they're they're still current.
Anyone else, Emily or Dan, want to add on to that, or I can move on to another question?
No, I think that was good.
No, thank you, Meg. That was a great answer.
Okay. Here's another question. I'm not sure I want the answer to this one, but the question is, do you ever receive any direct feedback from faculty or users regarding the funding opportunities you push to them, or Pivot in general, and also is there a way for you to know, I guess, that faculty are seeing what you're sending out there?
We don't have, unfortunately, a way to track whether they're using Pivot or not, unless they tell us, unless they work with our office and tell us directly. As far as the success of it, though, it is a common phrase. It's becoming a more common phrase, which is a good thing. People are starting to say, oh, look up Pivot or look for funding in Pivot. So no, we don't have a way to find out if they're utilizing Pivot, but they're speaking about it, and that's enough. That's a good thing for me.
Sure. I mean, this is a great question. It's sort of a holy grail of funding announcing, I guess, is, to connect it from your announcement to an actual proposal. One of the things that I've been working on for a while, and I'm hoping that we'll actually be able to implement it, is I'm in discussions with our sponsored projects office to add essentially a marketing question to proposals as they're submitted. How did you hear about this funding opportunity? And give people a checklist. And I feel like if I can accumulate that data, Pivot obviously would be one of the options, but I really want to find out, from faculty who are submitting, how they heard of proposals. Because I mean, our office touches a lot of proposals that go out the door, but only a fraction of the total number that come from the university. So that's one key piece that I would really like to learn.
I don't have much to add, just that, I'm still in this point right now where I'm using Constant Contact for my newsletters and linking to things in Constant Contact. And so through Constant Contact, I'm able to see pretty clearly how often people are clicking through on the links that I'm putting in there. I would like to transition to using the newsletters in Pivot instead, and having that whole thing become more automated, because like I think Emily was talking about, building a newsletter, or in my case 4 newsletters in constant contact every week, is so time consuming. So yeah, I can't remember where I was going with that, but as I said in my presentation, I would like to get to 100% faculty usage, but I don't know how invested I am in actually tracking that myself. It just seems like more work when I don't have very much time already. So it would be nice to be able to track that a little bit more easily in Pivot, to just go into the admin tab and see a graph. I know that you can see how many people have claimed their profile, etc. But
one of the things, if I can interrupt, kind of segue into the limited submission. We don't have the funds for InfoReady. So one of the ways that I know people are looking into Pivot is we put an internal deadline at the bottom of all the limited submissions with a link for them to fill out a cover letter. So that's how we utilize Pivot. So I know for all of our limited submissions, they actually need to go into Pivot to find the internal deadline. It was a big fight for me to say, I'm not going to put this limited information on one page and Pivot. That's just too much work. We're just directing everyone to Pivot. So as far as our limited submissions, they do have to go into Pivot to get that internal deadline. So, but that's because we, you know, again, don't have the funds right now for InfoReady and to be able to utilize that platform.
Let me just try to sneak in one last question. Thanks, Emily and Meg, for your answers there. In the interest of time, I'll make this sort of the last question, and maybe we can also help facilitate sharing of these materials offline. Is somebody had a question of what sorts of materials are you using for training, you know, faculty? What are your sort of tips on the training side of things, and do you have any materials that you'd be willing to share? And I'll just say, if there's any customers on the line who would like to share any of their training materials, you could contact me, this is Eddie, and we can actually help facilitate distributing them or making them available on some of our web pages for others to take advantage of. But I'll throw it out to our panelists. If anybody just roughly, you know, 30 seconds or a minute version of, you know, any good tips for training or materials that you have for training.
I guess I'll go first. I recommend the YouTube channel to a lot of people, actually, for how to do searches, particularly if I'm presenting to graduate students. That seems to be something they really latch onto. So I think that is a great resource. Otherwise, I use the other materials that Pivot provides, and then I have, you know, a PowerPoint essentially that I take as a roadshow or a Zoom show to help train people. Those are my main suggestions.
Anyone else?
Yeah. Hopefully this isn't too controversial. I don't actually share the Pivot training materials with folks, and just kind of assume that if they want them, they'll find them on their own. There are links on the website and everything. Instead, what I do is I use Zoom to record my own tutorial, and whenever there's like a major change to Pivot, I do a new one. Because my sense is that the faculty are a lot more likely to watch it and listen to it if it's me and not, you know, some corporation. So yeah, so I actually have my own video that I promote, and I've gotten good feedback on that.
So I do one-on-one. I go through it with them step by step. So if they have a question on, you know, the advanced searches, you know, what something means, then I can kind of explain it to them in layman's terms. We do group setting ones through our office maybe 2 or 3 times a year that will be recorded. So if somebody does miss it, I can send it to them and have them, you know, review it at their own time. But I don't have any, you know, any material actually to pass out even. It's typically just me going through each step and what each tab means, and where, you know, the easiest, fastest route they can find stuff. And so, and that way I can kind of promote certain things that, you know, regularly people will ask about. Then I can say, oh, use this feature, use this feature. So I don't have any, unfortunately. But if anyone wants to join my Pivot training, I'm okay with that too.
I would, if I can just jump onto that really quickly and say that that was where I started, and I got so tired of doing the one-on-ones and saying the exact same thing over and over again to every single person on campus, that I started just recording and then being like, okay, watch this recording, and then if you have any follow-up questions, let me know. And it saved me massive amounts of time.
That's a good idea.
It is a great idea.
Right. Well, with that, we'll wrap up our panel. I really want to thank each of our panelists again for taking the time to join us and share with us how you're using Pivot and your tips and relative challenges. And I'm sure it was really useful for everybody online. And